I'm just gonna have the video be you dancing, not knowing that I've already hit record.
You don't want to wear anything better?
I don't care. They're not watching me, they're watching you. I'm gonna turn the camera towards you.
Are you gonna be off screen?
No, I'm gonna be on screen.
Can I be a gray figure? Like
Stop.
they're interviewing
We're
someone?
just gonna interview. Alright. This is William Matthew Reynolds, also called Matt Reynolds, my husband. Will you tell them where you work?
I work at Albion Middle School in Sandy, Utah.
What do you teach?
Teach 7th grade science.
7th grade science. Okay. I just have a couple general questions for you. What should I expect in a classroom?
You can't expect anything in a classroom. Expect, especially with middle schoolers, expect the unexpected. They're hilarious and very easy to laugh at, and you can't expect anything normal out of them.
Okay. This applies, I know you have a large classroom. So if you have a large class size, what do you do to be able to connect with all of the kids?
Knowing their name, like I know all of my students' names. I probably knew them the first week. When you call on your students to call them by name, putting some effort into knowing things that they like so that when you are making analogies, you can compare things to things that they like, that you've heard them talk about. So that can make a bigger classroom seem smaller.
Okay. What have you changed since you first started teaching and why? I know this is your first year of teaching, but what have you changed since you first started and why?
It's my first year. I really haven't all changed all that much. I started current events. There's a lot of things I started this year because it's my first year teaching. I started having them do current events on science articles. I've changed how they turn in stuff is the exact same as I've always done.
Okay.
Not a lot's changed.
Where do you find inspiration as a teacher?
I Google just whatever I'm going to teach that week. And sometimes I type in the word lesson plan and just look through websites like Teachers Pay Teachers. There's lots of them for science specifically, like Biology Corner. A lot of websites, and I look through their ideas. And some of their ideas are too young or too advanced. Middle school kind of falls in this awkward little gap that almost gets forgotten. So I look for ideas that I think the students will like. I look for lots of images that I think they'll connect to.
Okay. This is one I'm interested in. What are the other responsibilities, if any, that you have besides teaching?
I mean, so in my school you don't have lunch duty, but at the old school I was at, you did. So we don't have lunch duty at the school I'm at, but old school you had to sit and stand in the middle while the kids ate. There's other things, there's lots of committees that you could be put on. Like I am on the intramural sports committee. However, our middle school doesn't have that many intramural sports. It's very seasonal, so that's very little effort. There's lots of personal development trainings you have to go to. We do personal development every Friday morning, and then there's lots of extra, almost like homework that goes with that. And then there's like once a month there's bus duty or some other duty like that.
Okay, so not too much. How do you manage a classroom effectively without spending a lot of boring time on management or getting the kids to like clean up effectively? Like, how do you effectively use your class time to make sure that the class is managed well?
Well, first, an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure. So making sure the first week you lay out your expectations. It's real easy to lighten up or let loose, but it's really hard to rein in a disruptive class. So making sure if they're not disciplined, to get them disciplined early on, show them that this is serious for you, showing them lots of rules and class procedures, and implementing ones and kind of explaining the reason why. If you explain that it's for their learning environment, most students are more willing to comply with you. I love what we call PBIS, Positive Behavior Enforcement Strategies. So instead of just punishing students who are misbehaving, going out of your way to reward students that are behaving. Like last week we did Mr. Reynolds' favorite things, just like Oprah's favorite things. If you had no missing assignments that week, you got some cool thing they wanted. For example, an extra bathroom pass. I'm going to do it next week, and they're going to have a note card that they can have to use on the test. Just reinforcing positive behavior, and then negative behavior will tend to go away.
Okay, and I know you do a lot of labs with your students. How do you manage classroom cleanup without yelling at the kids or making sure that things go smoothly? How do you run that?
I think it's important to, before you begin the lab, explain what the cleanup procedure is going to be. Explain that when we're done, when we have 5 minutes left, this is what I expect. Okay. If your lab group does not do that, there's going to be some consequences for it. And making sure that they have, when they work, especially with labs, that they work in groups, that they understand that it doesn't matter if Cindy doesn't clean up her table or doesn't do her part to clean up the table. You guys are working as a group. And so having them self-regulate themselves with cleaning up works well, because you can just, at the end of the day, when they turn in their lab kits, I just give them little Rubbermaid buckets with each lab in it. And when they come back, all I have to do is stand at a table, and then when they bring me the buckets, I can say, okay, group 1, you're free to go. And they know that until someone in their group cleans up, that they will be staying back to help clean.
It's a really good idea, especially going over it before.
Yes.
So that they don't finish a project, they're covered in glue and stuff, and then realize, because I'm applying it to like how I'll have my art classrooms go. Okay, let me just make sure it's recording before we keep going, and then good, 7 minutes. Okay. All right. Here's one that's interesting that I'm trying to think about how that will work in the art classroom. How can I step down in appropriate ways so that students become self-directed learners?
I think it's interesting when I give them, like tomorrow, we're dissecting pigs. And we have done a lot of directed learning where I told them about organ systems, lots of lectures, lots of PowerPoint, and they've drawn the organ systems. So now they should have a pretty good idea of what organ systems look like. And tomorrow I'm giving them a checklist of things they can do, but for the most part, it is a where you find each organ, and then you just go from there. I do not expect to have to direct this lab that much because I've done so much prep work throughout my lessons to where they should be able to handle a little bit of unstructured lab time.
Okay, so beyond that, how do you feel that you're like helping the students become invested in their own learning, where they want to do the assignments because they want to learn more? How do you feel that you've encouraged them to do that?
So I did an assignment a few months ago when we talked about plate tectonics, where I've told the students that unfortunately you have become the product of an education system that is just trying to finish a worksheet. So I said, instead today, there will be no worksheet, but you will for 45 minutes research these topics. And I gave them a list of approved websites they could go through, and we had a computer lab brought in that day, and they had 45 minutes to learn everything they could about plate tectonics, and then we had them present it the next day. And it was interesting what they did latch onto, what they found interesting, like earthquakes and tsunamis, and then things, and that, you know, greatly varied. Some kids thought the different plates were more interesting. So you're only going to learn what you're interested about. So getting students interested and letting them know it's okay to just learn on your own and learn for the sake of learning, mainly because anyone that wants to become great in something is going to have to do stuff outside of class to become excellent at it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. How do you encourage or motivate a student who's doing poorly to do better in your classroom? And that kind of goes into the next question that has to do with discipline students without being mean. So we want to just talk about.
Yeah, I think when a student knows that you want to be an advocate for them, that you don't they don't see you as an enemy when you just ask to see them. Sometimes I plan activities where if I notice a lot of kids are falling behind, I'll plan an activity that is very student driven, where I don't have to be up at the front lecturing or they're doing a lab, and during that time I just ask certain students to come see me, and we just sit down, they sit down next to my desk, and I just ask them about what's going on with their grades and ask them what we can do to make things better. And I think a lot of students, when they realize that you've noticed and that you do care about the grades they get, they tend to put forth more effort. That feeling of I don't want to let someone down. But also a lot of kids don't realize, our school has Skyward, which allows students to check their grades online. But some students don't realize how much they've slipped in just a short period of time. They thought their grades were fine, and then when they check it, they realize they now have a D or an F. So just being told you have a D and an F, or you have a D right now, but then you plug in, if they did all their missing assignments, if you plug in their work, they can see they can have a B+. And knowing that hope is not lost is a big motivator, because they're just not able to put that together at their age.
Yeah, for sure. And along with that, so how do you discipline your students without being mean?
Our school has lots of interventions. We have Tier 1 interventions where that's just teacher telling them that, just me saying what's going on here. A lot of times there's some sort of misunderstanding about what has been expected. So I can clarify that an assignment was due that day, tell them to get it to me quickly, or if it's a behavior issue, I do in my classroom, we have a yellow card for just like soccer. You get a yellow card, and I just call out your name, and I just tell you that that's a yellow. And for most students, that's all the warning they need. Just, okay, I understand I was a little out of line, I don't want to go any further. Then we have what's called Tier 2 interventions. Those are for students that Tier 1 interventions have not corrected the behavior we didn't want, either academic behaviors like not turning in work or doing work poorly, or behavior like talking out, not paying attention, being on their phone. So a Tier 2 intervention would be to be sent to another teacher's classroom and to write about what they did wrong. We call those think times. So they write about the mistakes they've made, which includes an apology to the teacher, a letter home, and a lot of times I don't even send the letter home. Normally that's enough of a jostle to say, hey, I'm being serious, I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack. If you behave for the next week without any issue, this doesn't have to go to your parents. And then we have Tier 3 interventions, which are with assistant principals and involve in-school suspensions and things like that. And I've never had to get to that point. Most of mine can be solved pretty quickly with even mild Tier 2 interventions.
Sounds like you have good kids. Let's see. How much of your curriculum is determined by the administration of your school?
Our administration is actually very hands-off in some ways, which is great. Our administration shows great trust with their teachers. I don't have to turn in lesson plans, for example. I have to have there's a few things for what they call JPAS, which I think stands for Jordan Performance Analysis Score, in which it evaluates new teachers. So they look over some of the lessons I plan to make sure that they're good. But for the most part, daily curriculum, we know the district gives us certain guidelines where we're supposed to be at certain points by certain times, which corresponds with the state standards, which Utah is going toward the Common Core in science to hopefully eliminate some of the repetitions in Common Core that Utah curriculum used to have. But for the most part, my administration doesn't really ask me where I am in my curriculum. I coordinate with another 7th grade teacher to make sure we're pretty close to each other, that we have the same plan on when to finish, and that's about all the attention my curriculum gets from administrators.
Administration, cool. Let's see. Here's a really funny one. Is the stress level you experience as a teacher worth the pay you receive? You said you don't have a lot of problems with your kids, but are there other things that create stress that...
I have at this school compared to my old school was very was in inner city Athens, low income, very socioeconomic diversity, Title I school, and there the stress probably did not outweigh, or probably the pay scale did not outweigh the stress of that job. But now I teach in a very affluent area, very high socioeconomic status. Most of my students are their parents are doctors, lawyers, professors. So my school there, very not stressful, pretty quick to get a hold of if it does get out of control. So there, I'd say the pay versus the stress is probably fine. The pay versus the work load to prepare lessons and the other stuff of grading, probably obviously teachers could probably be paid a little bit more. But as far as the stress level at my school, no. My school is it's not anything to really stress you out in terms of students.
Okay. You just mentioned grades. What do you base your grades off of?
So my grades are, there's 6 categories of grades. Tests account for 50% of grades. Tests